Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. For those of you who are new to the show, you can catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on ucy.tv. If you want to access the show's personal page, ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. For those of you who don't know who I am, again, I'm Brandon Turbeville. I'm a staff writer for Activist Post, activistpost.com. If you want to follow my articles and my work at Activist Post, you can just go to the home page and catch my work as it comes out, or you can go to the Contributors tab and click on that. That should lead you to some of my more recent work. I'm also the author of 4 books. You can check those out at thebookpatch.com as well as falseflagpublications.blogspot.com. If you want to keep up with my work individually, you can go to brandonturbeville.blogspot.com. That's where I repost all of my articles, all of my interviews, and all of the archived videos of this show. Again, that's brandonturbeville.blogspot.com. I seem to have to do this every time that I record the show. I have to apologize for recording so far in advance. Unfortunately, that's the restraints of my schedule and of my technological capabilities here. I'm severely handicapped in that regard. Either way, we have a jam-packed show tonight with many different topics if we can get into them. For those of you who do know about the show and listened in last week, then you'll know that I had Katerina Jaleva on as a guest. And Katerina was a mother, or is a mother, out of Utah, who's had her son stolen from her due to a corrupt DCFS system, or CPS system, and family court system. She was falsely accused of sexual abuse. Even the CPS agents and police investigators have admitted that she is innocent in this regard. However, she has been unable to see her son for almost a year. She actually had her son taken from her at gunpoint with armed police that came to take the child away. Well, I say this battle, her battle to get her son back, has been going on for the better part of a year. But while Katerina is at this point physically childless because of the CPS system and the so-called protectors, child protectors here in this country, you can contrast that with the Jimmy Savile case that we alluded to in the last broadcast. Now, I would imagine all of my listeners are quite aware of who Jimmy Savile is. For those of you who aren't, Savile was a disc jockey in England. He was also host of a ridiculous television show called Jim'll Fix It, where these little kids would write in about the problems that they had, and Jimmy Savile would fix these problems in his own strange way. Well, Jimmy Savile was named by people like David Icke as being a child molester, and while Icke was laughed under the table, and Savile, his character, of course, being beyond reproach, being friends with the royal family, being a celebrity, being a knight. He is actually Sir Jimmy Savile. His character was beyond reproach. Of course, after his death, it's determined that the allegations of child abuse, the official number is 400 children that this guy abused. Now, that doesn't count the cases of abuse where Savile was not caught, or when or that it was never reported. Again, in Katerina's case, open false charges of abuse result in armed police taking her child away. In the case of someone like Jimmy Savile, then if the allegations aren't ignored, then they're actively covered up. Well, granted, they are 2 different countries, but we are entering into a globalist system, a worldwide system where everything is going to be standardized. So I've written an article recently about this issue and about the connections that Jimmy Savile has to Prince Charles, the royal family, another man beyond reproach, whose character is beyond reproach. And the article is entitled "The Prince and the Pedophile: Charles's Connections to Pedophilia Networks." That's up at activistpost.com. And it reads, fresh on the heels of the fallout from revelations regarding former BBC entertainer Jimmy Savile and his unbelievably sickening and innumerable instances of child molestation, as well as the look-the-other-way approach taken by the BBC, more and more questions are now emerging in regards to the connection between Savile and British royalty, most notably Prince Charles. At least, more questions should be emerging. Unfortunately, however, the British mainstream media is deeming Prince Charles and the rest of his ilk and positions of power and perceived genetic royalty as if they are beyond reproach. This approach is typical and to be expected, yet it is also highly ironic considering the fact that such is the same position the mainstream media took with the allegations against Jimmy Savile for so many years. As a result of the Savile affair, mainstream outlets, particularly the BBC, now have a lot of egg on their faces in the areas of credibility and respect. In short, any connections placing Prince Charles in an uncompromising position regarding his connections with Savile or with his potential for sharing a penchant for unnatural relationships with children is being completely ignored, if not officially covered up. Although Prince Charles's friendship with Jimmy Savile, allegedly begun when the two met during the 1970s during the course of working with children's wheelchair sports charities, is now well known, the extent to which the prince and the pedophile were connected appears to go much deeper than the mainstream media reports let on. Of course, the two having come in contact at a charity event for the disabled is not too far-fetched, even if it is being reported by corporate outlets. After all, using children's charities as a hunting ground and a cover for his true motives was a notorious method used by Savile, who actually lived in children's homes and hospitals so as to be closer to his victims. This method is by no means specific to Savile, however, as many other sexual predators and pedophiles know exactly what areas of society to be involved in and what careers to pursue in order to gain access to their victims. Jerry Sandusky stands as a perfect example. Clarence House, Prince Charles's spokesman, declined comment on much of the relationship between Savile and Charles, only claiming that the relationship was mostly a result of their, quote, shared interest in supporting disability charities. Indeed. Of course, Savile was doing much more than supporting disability charities. That is, unless one places serial child rape in a much different category than the average person might. Indeed, one would not be judged out of place to question whether or not untold numbers of sexually assaulted children thoroughly cancels out any financial support that may have been given in the past. Apparently, in the view of British royalty, it does not. In fact, child molester Savile has enjoyed an unbelievable level of access to the royal family for the past 40 years. For instance, in the late 1980s, Savile was said to have acted as a type of marriage counselor between Charles and Diana, visiting their residence several times. At these visits, Dickie Arbiter, who took care of media relations for the Prince and Princess between 1988 and 2000, stated at these visits Savile's behavior was uncouth, to say the very least. Arbiter stated, quote, he would walk into the office and do the rounds of the young ladies, taking their hands and rubbing his lips all the way up their arms if they were wearing short sleeves. If it was summer and their arms were bare, his top lip would curl out and he would run it up their arms. This was at St. James's Palace. The women were in their mid to late 20s doing typing and secretarial work. Not only that, that's end quote, not only that, but Savile was brought into the private marital affairs of the royals once again in order to help the Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, in matters which were not disclosed to the public. Savile later claimed that he was brought in to help Fergie keep her profile down. Now, all of these connections are coming between the royal family and a disc jockey of a television star of a rather ridiculous television show. But suddenly he's a marriage counselor, he's a political advisor, and he's advising Fergie on how to keep her profile down. Now, let's imagine Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile is a freak, or was a freak. There was no doubt about that. He was obnoxious. He was out there. He was loud and so forth. So why would you bring in Jimmy Savile to teach someone how to keep their profile down. I mean, Savile was not somebody who kept his profile down. Now, if you're going based on the profile of Jimmy Savile for so many years, what was officially told, which was a fine guy who supported children's charities, then it would make absolutely no sense to bring in Savile to coach Fergie on how to keep her profile down, would it? Unless you were aware of what Savile was really up to. Because if you were aware of what Savile was really up to, you would be aware of how he truly kept his profile down. The real Savile, the child molester, wasn't known until after he died. So Savile was actually quite good at keeping his profile down. It looks like the royals knew this. Obviously, the relationship forged between Charles and Savile went far beyond two men who merely performed charity work for the same organizations. This can be evidenced by the fact that in 1990, Charles even consulted Savile for advice on the appointment of a senior aide for himself and Princess Diana. The relationship between Charles and Savile, particularly Savile's access to the royal family's affairs and the respect which was afforded Savile in this regard, has confused many onlookers. After all, Savile was nothing more than a BBC presenter and a disc jockey who was well past his prime. Now, not to mention the fact that Savile was well known as an uncontrollable freak, although many were under the impression that Savile's television persona was merely part of his shtick. Yet the clues to the prince's friendship with the pedophile might have more to do with similar interest in entertainment than a mere happenstance relationship. Although the evidence which connects Prince Charles to pedophilia is nowhere near as documented as that of Jimmy Savile, a trail of information certainly seems to be leading in that direction. At this point, it should be mentioned that, although the official line is that Savile and Charles met in the 1970s as part of the coincidence of mutual charity work, Savile himself has stated that he was friends with the royal family, quote, for 1,000,000 years, end quote. In fact, it was reported that Savile actually stated he was introduced to the royals in 1966 by Lord Mountbatten, a known pedophile and a known sexual pervert. In addition to Mountbatten, however, Greg Hallett, in his book Hitler Was a British Agent, also names Prince Philip as a pedophile. In reference to how he became introduced and ingratiated with the royal family, Savile stated, quote, coming from Lord Louis, who was the favorite uncle of Prince Philip, that was quite something. So obviously I hooked up with the prince. What was good enough for Lord Louis was good enough for him, end quote. So already we have Savile, a notorious pedophile linked to other individuals of the royal family named as pedophiles as well. Prince Philip, of course, is Prince Charles's father. Lord Mountbatten is largely considered Charles's mentor. Savile was indeed close to British royals as well as other elites for many years. It seems that his qualification for such high connections were mainly due to the ability to obtain children for the twisted appetites of those considered beyond reproach for the mainstream media, and unfortunately, the general public. That's very true, because even here in the United States, it's a bit improper, it seems, to insult the royal family. I know, because I've done it. And I've seen the reactions that people give you when you insult the stupid queen, or the stupid prince, or any of the other stupid genetic royalty. If you are if you're a red-blooded human being, the very idea of royalty, specifically genetic royalty, should offend you. Back to the article. Savile himself seemed to hint at this possibility in an interview conducted with Esquire. The possibility that I'm talking about is that he was procuring children for elite people. Savile himself seemed to hint at this possibility in an interview conducted with Esquire, where he stated, quote, "The thing about me is I get things done and I work deep cover," end quote. Savile's ridiculous television show, created for the sole purpose of enhancing his access to children, was thus appropriately named Jim'll Fix It. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the public were completely unaware as to what he was fixing and who he was fixing it for. Now, the articles are even out in the Huffington Post about how Savile actually prepared his shows and designed his shows for the express purpose of luring children into those shows, into those television shows, to increase his access to children. This man's entire life was built around raping children. He lived in children's homes. He lived in children's hospitals. He had children's shows. He went to child sex parties. He raped children in his cottage. This was his life. Essentially, it is clear that Jimmy Savile was a procurer of children not only for himself, but also for wealthy pedophiles all across the world, particularly in Britain. Even Savile's own nephew has recently gone public with information tying Savile to a network of pedophiles and 6 sexual parties where children were repeatedly raped. Guy Marsden, Savile's nephew, also stated that the parties were attended by household names in show business. However, as is being widely reported in the news, Savile's escapades at pedophilia were by no means limited to parties with the elite of entertainment. Many of his attacks on children took place in the halls at the hospitals and charities he helped fund and operate, even residing in his own personal room at 2 of these institutions. At this point, it is worth noting that Savile and Prince Charles are open supporters of the same charities. And all of this was well known. The hospital staff would actually encourage the children to pretend that they were asleep, so Savile couldn't come around and form some kind of sick bond with them and come back to rape them later on. Savile was raping kids in cancer wards and in wheelchairs. He was raping children who were mentally retarded or brain dead. The guy was also a necrophiliac too. So when he had keys to the children's ward, he also had keys and access to the morgues. This guy was beyond reproach. This guy was knighted by the royal family. Apparently, Prince Charles and the pedophile did have some similar tastes, some of which were even reported by the mainstream media. In 1999, after the prince accepted Savile's invitation to a private meal at Savile's home in Glencoe, Scotland, Savile had arranged for 3 women to parade around dressed in pinafores, a type of dress without sleeves and an open back that is often worn over other dresses. Interestingly enough, pinafores were often worn by children. After the dinner, Charles wrote Savile a Christmas card with a note that read, quote, "Jimmy, with affectionate greetings from Charles. Give my love to your ladies in Scotland." End quote. Of course, the mainstream media is certain that Charles is referring to the local women brought in for the royal entertainment. However, unless the hired help made an exceptional impression upon the mind of Charles, one must wonder whether or not these particular ladies are the ladies to which Charles is referring in his Christmas note. After all, Savile's Scottish cottage was also the scene of much child abuse as well. And you can see the pictures of Savile's cottage online. You can pull it up. You can see the ladies dressed in the pinafores, and you can see the cottage and the bunk beds in his cottage where he used to rape children. Now, in regard to the Christmas note that says, "Give my love to your ladies in Scotland," some have speculated that maybe the word ladies itself was code, that it was actually code for children. Keep in mind, in Scotland, where Jimmy Savile did much of his child rape, they call little girls laddies. Little boys are lads, little girls are laddies. So you wonder, it does make one wonder, whether or not this note is actually a play on the word laddie. So give my love to your ladies in Scotland. Later, Charles sent Savile a box of cigars and a pair of gold cufflinks on his 80th birthday, along with another note that cryptically read, quote, "Nobody will ever know what you have done for this country, Jimmy. This is to go some way in thanking you for that." End quote. Fortunately, many are now aware of what Jimmy has done for this country. Clearly, it would be best if they are given the full story along with it. But this is not likely to happen, however, as global pedophile rings are generally made up of some of the most elite individuals the world over. This is particularly relevant when it comes to any questions regarding the behavior of the royal prince. At any moment, when there is a chance that questions that information might be leaked that would be damaging to the reputation of genetic royalty. The documents are sealed, the whistleblowers are dealt with, and the controversy covered up. Some have even speculated that Princess Diana sealed her own fate after threatening to reveal networks of pedophilia within the royal family. Indeed, Diana did speak of dark forces and members of an organization that were monitoring her shortly before her death. For instance, when it appeared that the so-called Black Spider memos, a series of letters written by Charles to government ministers, would damage the perception of Charles's impartiality if he were to become king, then those memos were immediately blocked by the British government. Indeed, it would be extremely interesting to see the contents of the letters, since, in reality, the impartiality of the king is truly irrelevant in the grand scheme of British society and government. What is particularly interesting is that the letters are being blocked from release now, as the biggest pedophilia scandal in British history is unfolding, specifically at a time when one of the main focal points of the scandal, Jimmy Savile, was a close friend of the prince. Even more so, it comes at a time when British government officials are also being implicated in pedophilia networks. For those who may still be under the impression that pedophilia is a crime beyond the capabilities of British politicians, take a look at this partial compilation of British politicians convicted of pedophilia in recent years. That's a link there in that article to a list of British politicians convicted, not just the ones that were caught and let go, or caught and dismissed, or the allegations just simply ignored. These are convictions of pedophilia in England. And this list, I think, was compiled by Alan Watt, Cutting Through the Matrix. And it's pages and pages and pages. I first heard about that list when he read it on the radio, and he went on and on for about 20 minutes, and he only got an eighth of the way through the list. So go check that list out. And you could, I think there are, actually I know there are hyperlinks to each individual in there, if you have any questions about it. It's a pretty extensive list, but it's not comprehensive. It's only a partial compilation. But while the connections between Prince Charles and the pedophile Jimmy Savile are themselves enough to make one wonder, the fact is that Savile is not the only relationship with a potential pedophile that Charles has maintained. As reported by the Digital Journal, the Right Reverend Peter Ball is the most senior member of the Church of England to be arrested for offences against children. Ball was arrested on 8 suspected cases of abuse against boys and young men ranging from ages 12 to 20 during the 1980s to 1990s. Ball, who was the former Bishop of Gloucester, resigned in 1993 after he was served with a police caution for, quote, committing an act of gross indecency against a teenager, end quote. Upon his resignation, Ball retired to Manor Lodge, a, quote, wisteria-clad property owned by the Duchy of Cornwall, end quote. Manor Lodge is a property of the Prince's Duchy of Cornwall. It's a property of Prince Charles. He owns the property. Prince Charles owns Manor Lodge. In reference to his new living arrangements, Ball stated, quote, he, Prince Charles, has been wonderfully kind and allowed me to have a duchy house. The prince is a loyal friend. I have immense admiration for him. He has been through horrific times and is a great person, end quote. Considering the connections and personal friendships maintained by Prince Charles, one must question whether or not Charles himself has had some experience in the underworld of pedophilia. At the very least, the prince is the absolute worst judge of character who ever lived. What is also very interesting regarding the people named in these child sex scandals and the scope of the scandals themselves is that the individuals who have been trying their best to bring this information to light have been ignored and derided for years on end. This has been the case whether the individuals were whistleblowers, researchers, or even victims themselves. For instance, while much of mainstream Britain has had quite a time laughing at David Icke, suddenly his claims do not seem so fantastic and funny after all. Indeed, it was Icke who mentioned the global cabal of pedophiles and even many of the participants in them by name many years ago. While his voice was scarcely heard above the laughter at the time, he is, at the very least, on the record as having exposed these networks early on. As for Icke's remarks regarding the scandal today, He had this to say on November 7th, 2012. This is David Icke speaking. This guy, William Hague, the Foreign Secretary, needs to be questioned on why that Welsh inquiry into the massive pedophilia in Welsh children's homes was given the brief that it did, and therefore stopped these kids from talking about what happened to them. And this is the big thing. If the police investigation does not knock on the door of Buckingham Palace over this whole Savile case and the wider implications that have followed, then it's a cover-up, because the British royal family are fundamentally involved in this right to the top, right up to the people like Prince Philip and all these other people. This man, Savile, was an aging, sleazy disc jockey, right? And he had complete access to the British royal family, and they used him as an official go-between with Prince Charles and Princess Diana when they were falling out in their marriage. And now it's come out this week that he was advising Prince Charles on aids to employ. Why is this man so close, or was so close, to the British royal family? The answer to that will bring the British royal family down. End quote. Considering Icke's accuracy in terms of information on this particular issue, perhaps it would be wise if those who heard him speak years ago might take him a little more serious the second time around. So again, this article is entitled "The Prince and the Pedophile, Charles's Connections to Pedophilia Networks," up at activistpost.com, and we'll get this posted under the YouTube video, the archived broadcast here. So you can Google that on your own. You can also look under the YouTube video. We'll have that there for you. Now, of course, we know these pedophile networks are quite secretive groups. They move in and out among the elite, who are themselves quite secretive. And one of their secretive organizations that has seemed to get more and more attention as the years go by, especially this last year, is the Bilderberg Group. The Bilderberg Group, of course, met in Chantilly, Virginia this past year, or actually this year, over the summer. I was there, not in the meeting, of course. I was outside of the Westfields Marriott in Chantilly. But apparently the Bilderberg Group has met again. And this more hidden in plain sight. But I've got this article written, and it's up at activistpost.com. It's entitled "Bilderberg Group Quietly Meets in Italy." And this was some time ago, but nevertheless it's still relevant because I don't think that many people are aware that they have even met. While the attention of most Americans was focused on whatever trivia dished out from the mainstream media, such as the current hot celebrity or the David Petraeus incident, it appears that the Bilderberg Group has arranged what some have described as an impromptu meeting in Rome, Italy. Yet, although much of the European press is dark on the issue, which is unfortunately characteristic of the mainstream media in any nation, some Italian newspapers are reporting the information regarding the meeting. According to 21st Century Wire, the agenda apparently centered around the fate of EU countries such as Italy, Spain, and Greece, three nations that have been hit hard with the worldwide derivatives crisis and the subsequent imposition of austerity. Various newspapers from all across Italy are reporting that around 80 members of the Bilderberg Group, particularly the Bilderberg Steering Committee, have been called to Rome for a semi-secret meeting to discuss the unfolding events of the engineered crisis. We're going to take a break right here. We'll be right back after this.
We're ending the lie at UCY.TV. For the people, by the people.
I'm Madison Rupert, host of End the Lie Radio here on UCY.TV every Monday at 7 p.m. Pacific and 10 p.m. Eastern. Tune in and listen to some wonderful programming.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We were just talking about the Bilderberg Group meeting in secret, and in plain sight, basically here in Italy, or there in Italy. I'll get my words ordered correctly soon enough. But apparently the Bilderberg Group was meeting, and this Bilderberg Steering Committee mainly were meeting in Rome in order to discuss the financial crisis, the derivatives crisis, as it should be more properly named, in Europe, specifically the fate of Italy, Spain, and Greece, as well as as well as the other nations as well. So I'll pick up where we left off. In contradiction to the traditional methods of secrecy used by the Bilderberg group, such as renting entire hotels for days on end and dispensing with the guests and even some of the workers during the conference, this Italian Bilderberg meeting is taking place at the same time as another popular event, the Rome Film Festival. Thus, instead of meeting in total secret, it appears that the Bilderberg group is attempting to hide its treachery in plain sight while blending in with the rest of the crowd of actors, actresses, directors, and general celebrities. In this instance, one might suspect that the strategy of the group was to use the film festival as a cover for the attendees. If any were sighted at the Hotel de Russie, the sight of both the festival and the meeting, they could always claim they had only come to attend the film festival, do a short interview on the importance of film in Italian life and their favorite movie, and remain largely ignored in favor of the real celebrities walking about. In a cruel twist of irony and outright disdain for the little people, and as J.G. Vibes of the Intel Hub writes, Italian newspapers estimate the cost of the Rome meeting to be around 100,000 euros for 80 people in attendance. And that is irony, because as they decide to impose even more brutal austerity upon the Italian people, they are shoveling out 100,000 euros for 80 oligarchs, 80 worker bees, to sit around tables and plan the fate of everyone else. According to the Italian website dagospia.com, the attendees list appears as follows. We have a short list of some of the people that they seem to have confirmed that were there. Enrico Letta, Enrico Bondi, Mario Monti, that's a big name, Marieke de Vogel, Corradino Passera, Education Minister Francesco Profumo, Paolo Severino, Elsa Fornero, Giuliano Amato, Governor of the European Central Bank Mario Draghi, another big name, Lily Gruber, Chico Mentana, Bebe Bernabe, Flabuccio de Bortoli, Vendeline Vombrero, Mauro Moretti of CGIL, Alberto Nagel of the CEO Mediobanca, Angelo Gimbals, the chairman of AgCom, Federico Gazzoni of Unicredito, Enrico Teaspoons of Intesa, Fulvio Conte of Enel, Anna Marion Tarantolo, who is the president of RAI, Rodolfo De Benedetti, the president of CIR, and Ignazio Vis, the governor of the Bank of Italy. So we had a meeting in Rome of the Bilderberg group full of bankers and other ilk, other unsavory individuals there, planning the fate of the little people of Italy, as they have done since, well, unfortunately, the beginning of modern history. I think it's time we change that. But in keeping with our theme of secret societies, it appears that most of the elites love their secrecy, and for good reason. When you're trying to reduce the population of people who vastly outnumber you, it's a good idea to remain secret. And that goes for even individuals like Bill Gates, who, although he attends secretive organizations like the Lucky Gene Club, and no doubt has his other secret society qualifications, Bill Gates has been quite open about his desire to reduce the population. Now, what he's not quite honest with everyone about is that it's only a certain type of people that he wants to reduce. But nevertheless, people have been propagandized so much that just the suggestion that population reduction is acceptable now, because it sounds like it's green, it sounds like it's for the earth. Everyone is of the opinion that the earth is overpopulated. Of course it's not, but nevertheless, Bill Gates will continue to peddle his anti-human tripe. But in that regard, I have an article up, Activist Post. Again, it's Bill Gates Malaria Vaccine Flops in African Trials. And you can check that out as well. It's a short article. And what may prove to be a minor public relations setback for vaccine pushers like Bill Gates and GlaxoSmithKline, the much-touted Mosquirix vaccine, malaria vaccine recently rolled out in Africa, has been officially demonstrated to be only 30% effective in babies. Results from the final stage trial administered by GSK appeared to demonstrate that the vaccine only provided modest protection for babies aged 6 to 12 weeks, with a reduction in the contraction of the disease by only 30%, a much lower number than what had been touted by those promoting the jab in the industry and the corporate media. Reuters also reports that for children after the age of 6 months, a 65% rate was established. For children of 5 to 17 months old, the researchers claim a protection of around 50%. In response to what Reuters has dubbed a surprisingly poor result for the vaccine, Bill Gates stated, quote, "The efficacy came back lower than we had hoped, but developing a vaccine against a parasite is a very hard thing to do," end quote. Indeed, Gates is correct in suggesting the difficulty for creating a vaccine for a protozoan, the type of parasite which causes malaria. This is because vaccines are supposedly designed to protect against viruses. Thus, the Mosquirix vaccine enters into the growing science of DNA vaccines, a research field which is expanding, but also one in which the science is still very much out in regards to effectiveness, safety, and even possibility. Nevertheless, GSK has announced that it will not be giving up in the attempt to develop Mosquirix into a more effective vaccine and will be working with governments and international groups in order to fund the operation. GSK claims it does not plan to make a profit from Mosquirix, although it admits that it will be charging a 5% profit margin on the product. The funding for the development and rollout, of course, will be coming from the governments and international groups mentioned above, meaning it is the cash-strapped taxpayer who must shovel out the cash for yet another eugenics program aimed at poor Africans. And that's true. Anytime they say the government funds it or an international group funds it, what they mean is you. You fund it. Interestingly enough, it was Bill Gates himself who once stated, quote, "The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But wait a minute. That's end quote. Wait a minute. This has probably been beat to death within the alternative media, but it bears mentioning again. If we do a really great job on new vaccines, we could lower the population by 10 or 15%. I thought vaccines were to prevent disease. I thought vaccines would lower the I thought the disease would lower the population. If the vaccines work, wouldn't more people be alive? That doesn't make sense unless the vaccines are killing you. And then, of course, we have the mention of reproductive health services, which is just code word for abortion and sterilization. But psycholinguistics, of course, reproductive health services sounds so much better. That sounds like something women need. So we'll all accept that. Of course, it bears noting, especially in this context, that the results of the GSK study show only a 30% efficacy rate, yet the companies, governments, and international groups, meaning you, behind the push are continuing to move forward with plans for yet more vaccination programs whose harmful effects have not been properly studied. Yet, even the 30% itself is highly suspect, considering the fact that there has never been a study proving that vaccines are either safe or effective that itself was not connected to a vaccine maker or pharmaceutical company. I'll read that again. Yet, even the 30% itself is highly suspect, considering the fact that there has never been a study proving that vaccines are either safe or effective that itself was not connected to a vaccine maker or pharmaceutical company. The fact that the ineffectiveness of the malaria vaccine is being announced openly by the corporation that created it, as well as one of the most notorious vaccine pushers in the world, is striking. With this in mind, one could be led to suppose that the real percentage of efficacy might even be lower if non-politicized science were applied to it. And of course, politicized science is now the norm in this society. There's no such thing in America or anywhere else in the world for that matter as true science. It's all politicized. If you ever get a true scientist involved in a project and that scientist ends up losing his job or his funding or his credibility is destroyed by dragging his name through the mud in the press, or something to that effect. In the end, the real goal of such vaccine programs as those currently being funded in Africa is a eugenics-based population reduction philosophy that permeates governments, corporations, NGOs, and academia. Unfortunately, it is for this reason that the open failure of the malaria vaccine will do little to deter the expense of more money, more time, and more propaganda being spent toward the goal of vaccinating and reducing the vast majority of the population of Africa. And of course, the expense of more money, more time, and more propaganda is not only because you're paying for it, but because to certain people, this agenda is a religion. They certainly believe in this population reduction agenda, especially the reduction of populations that they deem unfit. They view this as a religion. It's one of their, it is their guiding project here. But as I mentioned, DNA vaccines and the emerging science in that's again, the science is out. But DNA itself is becoming a commodity here for governments. As I'm sure most of the audience already is aware of the fact that governments have been warehousing DNA from innocent people as well as convicted people for some time, and various different manners of gaining access to that DNA. Of course, I'm sure people are aware that if you're arrested, you're convicted, they get your DNA, but also if you're just arrested, many states allow for the sampling of DNA then as well. Of course, individuals have their blood taken from them at DUI checkpoints on a routine basis. Now, we could continue to go down the rabbit hole of unconstitutional laws and procedures, such as the fact that not only is it wrong for you to have your DNA taken, your most personal piece of data, personal information, we could also say that it's wrong for you to have your blood taken, especially when your blood is generally being taken by the police themselves, who are incapable of working a taser, often incapable of driving their cars properly, much less operating a needle and medical equipment. But that's neither here nor there. Again, so having to surrender your blood to these officers, what a joke, these officers is also unconstitutional and a violation of your Fourth Amendment. So are the DUI checkpoints themselves, but we won't diverge or digress too far away from the topic of the article that I'm about to read, which is up at activistpost.com. Supreme Court to rule on police access to DNA samples for crime-fighting databases. As the U.S. Supreme Court meets privately over the next few days, it seems that all of the pieces of the puzzle are coming together in order to form what will undeniably be the most scientifically advanced dictatorship ever realized in world history. Supreme Court justices are currently meeting in private for the purpose of deciding whether or not to hear a highly important genetic privacy case regarding the possibility that government authority extends to taking DNA samples from anyone arrested for serious crimes. If the court rules in favor of the prosecutors who wish for greater access to DNA samples, convictions will not be necessary to require DNA from arrestees. As David Kravitz writes for Wired, at least 21 states and the federal government have policies and laws requiring suspects to give DNA samples upon their arrest. In these states, DNA saliva samples are added into state and federal crime-fighting databases, effectively creating a catalog of individuals and their most personal information, even those not guilty of committing a crime. Kravitz writes, quote, "The issue confronts the government's interest in solving crime, balanced against the constitutional rights of those arrested to be free from government intrusion." End quote. The case now before the Supreme Court justices revolves around a decision made by Maryland's top court, which decided that taking DNA samples from suspects who were not convicted was a breach of the Fourth Amendment, the right against unreasonable searches and seizures. The Maryland Court of Appeals stated that the individuals arrested have a, quote, weighty and reasonable expectation of privacy against warrantless, suspicionless searches, end quote, and that this expectation is not superseded by the state's, quote, purported interest in assuring proper identification, end quote. In response to the argument made by Maryland prosecutors that DNA mouth swabs were no more intrusive than fingerprinting, the court responded by stating that it blank could not turn a blind eye to the vast genetic treasure map, end quote, in the DNA databases maintained by the state. Furthermore, the court noted that while fingerprinting can only provide information concerning the identity of a suspect, DNA holds keys to a person's family history and relations, health risks, and many other aspects of an individual's most personal details. In the move toward a society which attempts to predict criminal or dissenting behavior, it is also frightening to note that many experts and would-be scientific tyrants claim that DNA can actually envisage such behavior. Regardless of the falsity of this pre-crime theory, the fact is that more and more credence to such pseudoscience is being given by the corporate media, law enforcement, government corporations, and the scientific community itself. It should also be noted that the case currently being reviewed by the Supreme Court does not involve the practice of taking DNA samples from convicts, a policy that is not being challenged. According to Kravitz of Wired, the Supreme Court has held previously that when police conduct an intrusion of the body during the course of an investigation, exigent circumstances or a warrant is needed. However, one should keep in mind that the taking of blood from a suspected drunk driver is now considered an exigent circumstance because alcohol evaporates in the body. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court meeting currently taking place does not look promising. After all, Chief Justice John Roberts has already stayed the Maryland court decision and has actually indicated that there was a fair prospect that the Supreme Court would reverse the decision. Although one hopes that the court will either rule in favor of the Maryland court's decision or that it will decide not to review the case and allow the ruling to become law, it is an unfortunate reality that the U.S. courts have not only been derelict in their responsibility to protect the rights of the American people, but they have been outright hostile to it, particularly in recent years. Any court that rules it constitutional to force individuals to buy private products or to strip search nonviolent arrestees with impunity and no probable cause is one that holds very little hope for the survival of privacy, constitutional, or human rights. While we await the decision of the Supreme Court, we can always remain hopeful. However, considering the court's recent history, it would be unwise to allow these hopes to rise too high. Now, with that in mind, with that behind us, I want to move on to the more strange part of this broadcast where a couple of weeks ago I mentioned the mysterious booms over South Carolina. I didn't get into that because we ran out of time on the show. Last week we talked with Katerina Jaleva, so we weren't able to get into that either. Regular listeners here to UCY might have caught my interview with Nuked Radio, where I talked for about 10 minutes about what happened here because I experienced it personally. So I know whereof I speak in regards to these booms and these strange lights. But I had an article posted up about it, activist post. It's entitled "Numerous Reports of Mysterious Booms and Strange Lights Over South Carolina," and because I have no real clue as to what these things truly are, although I do have some suspicions, but I won't go into that here because I really don't have any evidence for it. It's just total speculation. But because people seem to be pretty interested in what this was, I think I'll go over the article here in the remaining time that we have. Several months ago, I wrote an article entitled "Investigation Continues into Source of Strange Michigan Area Explosions and Radiation Spikes," where I reported on the mysterious sounds and vibrations felt by countless individuals all over the state of Michigan. In this case, the corporate media, law enforcement, and the military typically tried to downplay the anomalies, even to the point of arresting activist journalists for appearing at the local military base with questions as to the nature of the disturbances. In Michigan, residents all across the state and into Indiana reported hearing loud explosions which actually rocked the ground hard enough to shake their houses. Bob Powell of The Truth is Viral, who lives in the area and is himself a military veteran, described the explosions as being similar to the firing of artillery, both in sound and impact. It was actually Bob Powell who was arrested for asking questions. That's all he did was ask questions. Recently, however, almost exactly the same kind of incident has occurred in South Carolina, spanning the entire PD region and all the way into North Carolina. On the evening of November 5th, around 7:30 to 7:45 p.m., various law enforcement and local news agencies were contacted by individuals living in the PD region of South Carolina in reference to a loud boom that was large enough to shake their houses. The reports were numerous around Pamplico, Johnsonville, Marion, Hemingway, Aner, Nichols, Hanna, and Mullins. However, as stated earlier, reports also came from as far away as Evergreen, North Carolina. Marion County dispatchers alone received more than 100 calls in 10 minutes related to the booms. The U.S. Geological Society has publicly stated that there was no seismic activity in the region on these dates, and emergency dispatchers confirmed that there had been no plane crash. Very soon after the event, Johnsonville Police Chief Ron Douglas claimed the booms were, quote, from a handful of military aircraft, end quote, that had broken the speed of sound. However, this explanation, which was rapidly adopted by the local media, does not necessarily hold water. For one thing, most of the individuals I have spoken to, and this includes myself, have heard jets break the sound barrier before, and both the sound and the impact of the mysterious booms were much different than that of jets breaking the sound barrier. Secondly, if the jets were the cause of the sound and of the heavy vibrational impact that shook so many houses, the jets themselves would have had to be flying very low. But if the jets were flying low enough for this type of effect to be achieved, witnesses would also have been able to hear the jets. This writer can personally attest to the intensity of the booms, as I myself was in the area at the time of the incident. The sound, much like what Bob Powell described, sounded much more like artillery than any other comparable sound. There was no lead up to the shaking. It was simply as if one was experiencing the vibrations of an explosion. The impact was so strong that one way to describe hearing and feeling the impact from inside the house, it would be as if one could imagine a full-grown adult climbing on top of the back of a couch or recliner and leaping off, landing full force on the living room floor. Much like this scenario, the impact was sudden and short-lived. The sound, however, was extremely similar to the firing of artillery, much as Powell described it in Michigan. The above incident occurred, as mentioned earlier, on November 5th. However, 1 week prior, a similar, albeit weaker, explosion was heard in the same locations. Reports were made to this writer from both Marion and Mullins in terms of the noticeable impacts and sounds of this separate explosion. Like the first, the sound was similar to artillery. The impact was also distinct but sudden and brief. To my knowledge, there have been no mainstream local reports of the earlier explosion. Also, as in the second incident, I can personally attest to the nature of the first. Of course, the explosions themselves are mysterious and intriguing enough. However, when one takes into consideration some accompanying reports of other strange occurrences, the incident takes on a much more shadowy feature. Just after the second incident, a reporter from the Weekly Observer in Hemingway stated that he saw several aircraft in the sky. He stated, quote, I saw 6 jet aircraft with more lightning behind them than normal. This would lead me to believe that they were engaging their afterburners and thus the supersonic speeds and sonic boom that followed. At first, the reporter's statement seems to corroborate the idea that the explosions were being caused by sonic booms. However, as I stated earlier, if the jets that were making this sound were flying this close to the ground as to be counted and the action of their afterburners clearly seen, then many other individuals would have also heard the jets themselves. Furthermore, the accompanying noises themselves did not sound anything like a sonic boom. One must wonder exactly what the alleged aircraft were doing in the area. In addition, there had been military exercises conveniently scheduled a few days before the second explosion and 1 day before the first. As reported by WBTW, there was an Air Force training exercise scheduled for the PD region on Halloween morning, but there was nothing announced for Monday, end quote. Others reported seeing what they believed to be helicopters. Joe Johnson of Bridge Neck stated, quote, I saw the lights, they looked like helicopters, then there was a loud roar, end quote. Again, Johnson's description of strange lights is also a common report coming from sources who felt the explosions as well as those who did not. Many of those who felt the explosions reported seeing bright lights just beforehand. Others were reporting strange lightning in the skies in the days leading up to the explosions. And several people questioned me about the strange lightning. I didn't see that, but more than one person did ask me. With reports of this nature growing in scope from Michigan to South Carolina, and indeed all over the country, there is clearly something happening. The question, of course, is what? As Bob Powell stated in regards to Michigan's mysterious incident, if you're looking for information in the local media, good luck, because they're not saying a word. Now, shortly after that article was published about the mysterious booms here in South Carolina, the PD region, I received notice that there were similar reports in New Jersey. And I did a small write-up on that. New mysterious booms reported in New Jersey. That's up at Activist Post as well. Alongside the mysterious booms which were recently heard and felt all across the PD region of South Carolina, it appears that there were also reports of these same types of incidents occurring much farther north, this time in Manchester Township, New Jersey. According to an NBC 10 report broadcast on October 5, 2012, residents who experienced the event said that both the noise and the impact felt exactly like an explosion, with many stating that the impact actually shook the windows of their home. NBC 10 conducted interviews with several of the Manchester Township citizens who all agreed that the sound and impact was akin to an explosion, with some interviewees stating that the booms were strong enough to frighten them awake. One resident stated that, although he can routinely sleep through thunder, he actually believed that his car hit something. Another woman who was interviewed said the booms were so loud she thought the house next door had blown up. However, this is not the first experience Manchester Township citizens have had with the mysterious booms. In fact, over the last few months, residents have experienced these booms several times. Police seem to be as baffled as the residents, stating that there is an ongoing investigation, but that there is no explanation they can put forward at this time. At least they're being honest. Although, as NBC 10 noted, the Lakehurst military base is located near Manchester Township, the news crews contacted the base and were told that there were no explosions on the base on those dates, and the residents experienced the booms. The Manchester Township incident, in addition to the incident which occurred in the PD region of South Carolina, bears a striking similarity to yet more mysterious booms which occurred all over the state of Michigan in June of this year. Whatever it is, the only thing that is clear is that no one who has experienced the booms can explain what they are. Perhaps what should be even more concerning, however, is that no answers are coming from anyone who may be in a position to know what these booms might be. If someone does know, they certainly aren't telling anyone else. Now, we'll get this article posted up again, as all the others, at the bottom of the YouTube video. You can also Google these. They should come up relatively easily. But after I had both of these articles posted, especially with the New Jersey one, I put out an opportunity for the readers to leave their comments in the comments section as to whether or not they have felt similar explosions or booms in their area. Now, I haven't gone back to verify any of them because I don't have time. Hopefully there are other people out here checking these things out and trying to get to the bottom of it. Unfortunately, we can't chase every story that there is out there, but if you go to read the article, go and check the comment section and see if see how many different reports of these booms there are. And of course, if you have experienced them yourself, then feel free to leave a comment at the bottom of the article, and hopefully if you have a report from a local news agency, you can copy and paste that down there as well. And make sure you get those articles out to anybody else who's experienced those things. We'll see you next week.